who many of you also probably know, is a consultant. And prior to his time as a consultant, Curt was the executive director of a little nonprofit here called Save the Bay for 20 years. Curt then went on to lead the Northeast Regional Office for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And we're pleased to have Curt here today as well. Thank you, Curt. And Kim Korioth, many of you may know from her time working on these issues at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. Kim now has what I think might be the most important job in state government. That is the Chief Resilience Officer, where she helps to coordinate the state's response to climate change and making sure that our communities are resilient to those impacts. And I'll hand over the mic now to our moderator for today's panel, a good friend of mine, former Director of Advocacy for the Audubon Society, former President of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island, now the Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence, Priscilla Dela Cruz. Priscilla.
Thank you, Jed. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panelists. So before I hand it over to our panelists and get the conversation going, as you heard, I am Priscilla Dela Cruz, Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence. And I'm so pleased that this year's theme at the Expo is focused on partnerships and collaboration. I think it's so critical when we're talking about climate change action in general. And given the theme of this year's Expo, focus on partnerships, this panel is very critical. And although I'll be presenting on a topic after this panel, focus on the work we're doing in Providence, I will say this is, I think, a critical conversation, and I'm glad that I see the majority of you all sticking around for the indoor discussion. The indoor program conversation, because we're going to be talking about the importance of building strong statewide partnerships for climate resilience. But the thing I want to go ahead and stress is that the Green Infrastructure Coalition is so fitting to be hosting, right, this theme. Because they've been doing this for a really long time in terms of exemplifying, right, how you do this collaboratively, how you bring practitioners together, how you bring state agency leaders together, how you bring the philanthropic community to really tackle, to really expand green infrastructure and how critical this is in terms of climate resiliency. And they were doing this, right, before many of us, including me, knew what these terms meant, and really furthering that through outreach and education. So really kudos to the Green Infrastructure Coalition, and also the work that they've done to really expand this Stormwater Innovation Expo, and to bring you all here today. You all did not want to stop talking to each other. I think that's also an example, right, of how collaboration happens, right? Bringing people together and creating these public and private partnerships as well. And also that the Expo's happening here, right? And that you have an indoor and outdoor program. And that you are at what we call the home of the Stormwater Innovation Center, where you actually get to see nature-based solutions, right? The hub for some of this green infrastructure happening in an urban setting. So I am so pleased that I get to moderate this discussion with three experts up here in their sectors. We are not, Jed gave you a brief overview of their backgrounds, and I think none of them really need an introduction. And they will go ahead during their opening remarks, however, expand on their backgrounds. And what I'll be asking them to do as they talk about the topic itself in the opening remarks, I want them to touch upon their experience in this area and how they approach building strong partnerships for climate resilience. And really, what are they currently working on and what's already happening in this space? So I am going to go ahead and start, David, with you, and then we'll go to Kim and Curt. David?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by thanking everyone in this room for your commitment to climate resiliency, and thank everyone at the Rhode Island Green Infrastructure Coalition, Sarah, Alicia, Jed, for their dedication and years of work with the foundation, and also for organizing this event and inviting me to participate. Thank you, Priscilla, for your passion on this issue and for moderating today's panel. And it's great to be with Curt and Kim, two incredibly well-known leaders in our state committed to addressing the impacts of climate change. I have been the president and CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation for just over a year now. Shortly after I began, we started the most comprehensive effort to really update the strategic action plan for the Rhode Island Foundation. And doing that, we really engaged in what was the most significant community engagement probably in anyone's lifetime, to be sure that what we were developing wasn't my vision for our work or even the great team at the Rhode Island Foundation, but was really informed by the community that we served. And so we did a lot of, in a lot of different ways, engaged with the public, from community dinners to public polling to public surveys to focus groups. It was a really deep engagement and an ongoing discussion with the public for almost an entire year. We collaborated with many of our partners, our donors, people who work at the Rhode Island Foundation, people who are grantees to the Rhode Island Foundation. We did a lot of research, and we really analyzed kind of what we learned in those first 9 to 10 months to really understand how we can best use the resources of the Rhode Island Foundation and our unique capabilities to address what we identified as community priorities. And what we kind of did in that process was assessing who we are as a community foundation, what we do and how we do our work. And Rhode Islanders shared with us throughout that process pretty clearly that they wanted the Rhode Island Foundation to do more to address the state's housing crisis, to improve public education, to foster economic opportunity, to ensure access to quality, affordable health care, to mitigate the persistent root causes of inequity, to support climate action efforts, and to help communities form stronger connections to civic life. So it was a lot. It's a tall order, a lot of work. But what we heard really clearly in all of these different venues is that people were particularly interested in the Rhode Island Foundation playing a greater role in responding to the crisis of the climate. And you know, the Rhode Island Foundation has funded environmental work for quite a long time, but we wanted to make this much more of a priority in our new action plan. And what we also heard from Rhode Islanders, which is really perfectly suited to the theme of today's Expo, Partnerships for Statewide Climate Resilience, is that the Rhode Island Foundation's approach should be one that acknowledges we don't have all the answers or all the resources needed to address very complex challenges, particularly challenges like climate change that will take more than one organization or even sometimes one generation to address, but also that there are, you know, roles for everyone in this work. You know, after decades serving in the state, municipal and federal government, and now coming to the Rhode Island Foundation and working with community organizations and businesses and institutions of higher education across the state in very different ways in all the roles I previously had, I've become very aware of the need and the benefits of really strong partnerships. And so, you know, all of these entities bring a different perspective, they bring a different set of experiences, a different set of tools, and the abilities to solve challenges. And we're very excited at the Rhode Island Foundation. We're going to launch this kind of officially in early December, but we recognize that climate change is an existential threat to our planet, to our country, to our state, particularly the ocean state, and it requires collective, coordinated action and a serious commitment to do this work and resources. And so partnerships and engagements across all sectors are imperative in our view to addressing climate change. We can't act in silos. We don't want to support people who are working in silos. There is a role for state and federal government, municipalities, businesses, nonprofits, philanthropy, and community-based organizations, as well as labor, advocates, and every other sector of our community to really work together to respond to the really serious challenges we face. And the Rhode Island Foundation looks forward to being a convener and a catalyst for some of that, and obviously an investor in some of the work that's being done. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, David. That Rhode Island Foundation is prioritizing, right, and elevating the work around climate as the biggest foundation in our state, and that you're leading that, right, given your experience coming from Congress and also your history in leadership, elected roles in Rhode Island. But also want to express deep appreciation of the Rhode Island Foundation over the many years, supporting, right, the Green Infrastructure Coalition when you talk about Rhode Island Foundation, supporting climate resiliency work in the state, and also this very expo. So thank you for that. Now, Kim, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. There are numerous climate resilience needs across Rhode Island, spanning various climate impacts, as we know. Sea level rise, warming air and water temperatures, increased storm intensity and precipitation, changing biodiversity. And there are a variety of needs spanning different assistance areas as well, right? There's planning, authentic community engagement, project design, construction, maintenance, as Kate was speaking to, and funding, of course. Strong statewide partnerships are vital to delivering the support that our local communities need to successfully address these climate change impacts. And I'm looking forward to discussing this essential and pressing topic with my fellow panelists here today. Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, its mission is to protect, restore, and promote our environment. And we do so by supporting municipalities, communities, organizations, statewide partners to achieve water quality and habitat protection goals. However, in recent years, RIDEM and the state of Rhode Island have taken further steps acknowledging the needs for our efforts to support climate resilience as well. Climate resilience, which here in Rhode Island focuses primarily on climate adaptation, how we prepare for and respond to the climate change impacts I previously mentioned, is of high and immediate importance. In the past year alone, as you know, we've seen 3 federally declared disasters for severe storms and flooding, amounting to over $21 million in assistance provided by FEMA. We need to be acting proactively if we want to both efficiently and effectively address these impacts. This past year, RIDEM has coordinated across statewide partners to begin and streamline delivery of Rhode Island's climate resilience resources across 4 key categories. First and foremost, there's planning, including an upcoming 2024 State of Resilience Report and 2025 Statewide Resilience Plan. Local resilience planning, as you know, delivered through the Municipal Resilience Program, and annual resilience updates with our cities and towns. There's also implementation, which we've been delivering through Resilience Conceptual Design Assistance. Many of you have heard about our Designing for Resilience initiative, which we've been partnering with the Nature Conservancy, Save the Bay, Weston and Sampson, and the Infrastructure Bank on. As well as our state grant programs for resilience, including OSCR, the Municipal Resilience Program Action Grants, our Climate Resilience Fund grants, which we just had an announcement for yesterday as well. And in addition, we have federal grant applications that we've been coordinating on across our statewide agencies, across our state partners, to organizations federally, such as NOAA, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. How can we become pooling our resources and working together to go after some of this federal funding? Third, of course, there's statewide collaboration. At DEM, we've established 3 statewide resilience work groups, one for our state agencies, one for our statewide partners, including our non-governmental organizations, our universities, our private sector subject matter experts, and one for our municipalities and communities as well. And fourth, of course, there's transparency. How do we bring planned web resources, statewide convenings to the table in order to make sure that there's a wide understanding of the work that we're completing and what resources are available to local municipalities and communities. I mentioned a little bit about our statewide collaboration. Our Resilience EC4 subgroup, which is our state agency group, and our Rhode Island Resilience Partner Group, which focuses more on our nonprofits, our universities, our private sector. They've been hard at work mapping statewide resilience initiatives, discussing statewide resilience standards and metrics, brainstorming on collaborations, and providing valuable input towards the 2024 report and 2025 plan. On one last note, it is important to remember that while climate resilience is a statewide and regional matter, it is not something that can be tackled at the state or national level alone. What resilience necessitates is long-term vision and strong statewide collaboration. While we need this, it also requires us to coordinate on stitching together a quilt of solutions that responds directly to local contexts and priorities. We need to ensure that we're responding directly to the needs of our local communities and municipalities, as Kate was speaking to, as without local resilience, we cannot build a more resilient Rhode Island. At DEM, as DEM works to build our climate resilience office, our climate resilience staff, at the core of it, we intend to center our regional resilience coordinators who can provide local communities to help local communities to access our state climate resilience resources. These positions are anticipated to be hired on and posted January 2025. Thank you again for having me here, and I'm looking forward to discussing with you all further.
Thank you, Kim. And now you can see why Judge said Kim's position is so critical, right, when it comes to issues of climate resiliency. And I have to say, I met Kim when she was back at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. And when I heard she took on this very important role, I was thrilled, not only because of the skill set she brings to the position of Chief Resilience Officer, but because of the collaborative spirit and how innovative she also is, which we really need that type of approach in that very role. Thank you, Kim. Curt, over to you.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thank you, fellow panelists. And I want to say thank you to the people at Roger Williams Park for such a beautiful park. The department has done such a great job. I live just on the other side of it, and I raised my kids over there, and this is such an asset, and it's fabulous to see. And it kind of leads me into my first point about what moves partnerships forward. And some of that is about leverage and leadership. And one of the things I did as regional administrator, it's one of the first things I did, and maybe one of the not necessarily the smartest things I did, was take an enforcement action against the Narragansett lab, EPA lab in Narragansett. Now you can imagine the idea that the regional administrator is taking enforcement against the national lab for RCRA violations. I need to go into what all that was about, but we settled on a $500,000 supplemental supplemental environmental project, and we sent that to Roger Williams Park to begin the cornerstone of the early work on stormwater back in, I don't know, it must have been 2010, something like that. So I think and that led to a lot of partnership building and leadership work. So one thing that's really important I found in my background is leaders leveraging partnerships, meaning sometimes it takes a leader to say, we need to do something to move forward. David and I were talking about Mayor Menino in Boston. We just heard a lot about Climate Ready Boston, and why did that happen? Well, when I was in Boston, I had a chance to work with Mayor Menino on Climate Ready Boston, and it is an amazing initiative. And it was started with a partnership between a foundation, the Barr Foundation, and the City of Boston, built on other partnerships, meaning regulators like EPA and others coming through. And it's really exciting to hear David acting as a leader, moving Rhode Island Foundation forward in this space. Really, really important. So those are just two examples of leaders leveraging partnerships, getting partnerships moving. Sometimes leaders have to say to their siloed people who work for them that we need people working together, not just your silo or your silo forcing action. I had really difficult conversations with permit writers who sometimes wanted to write really stringent permits that I knew cities couldn't really do, and said, no, can we use that permit to leverage people talking together and coming up with solutions at the city level? Again, having a vision for how things get done, as well as what you need to do, is really important for moving partnerships forward. And I've always found that to be kind of the cornerstone of what leaders need to do to foster partnerships going forward. So I'll stop there. I know we want to get on to our questions, but it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm very excited about the Green Infrastructure Coalition. Again, some seeds were planted back when I was at Save the Bay for that kind of stuff. The community-based restoration program, again, grounded in collaboration. So it's very exciting to see you're doing that.
Thank you, Curt. I agree with all of the above, and the importance of that, of leaders really leveraging those partnerships and exemplifying that and really setting the tone for that. So I think that's a great way to get this conversation going, and I want to stress that We're going to treat this as a conversation, so I have a series of questions for you all in no particular order, so feel free to chime in. You all will be sharing the microphone. And I think you'll all do that very well. So the first question I have for you all, I think it's important to start this conversation, just given the vulnerability of our ocean state to the impacts of climate change. So thinking about as Rhode Island adapts to climate change and works to make our communities statewide more resilient, let's start thinking about what principles or values do you think should guide what will likely be tough decisions ahead of us? And we've had to make, right, some of those tough decisions. In terms of where do we put our limited resources? And then a follow-up to that, or if you want to tackle them together, and why are partnerships so vital when resources are limited, right? And we're making those tough decisions. And you could also use my microphone too, but in no particular order. You want to take a shot, Curt?
I'll take a shot. So, great question, first of all. I was thinking about this, and some people probably find me a broken record. But one principle of this work has to be what we call a systems thinking approach. When I was at Brown, I had a chance to step back and sort of reflect on the work. And I realized that even when we were doing environmental work back in the day, years ago, we tended not to think holistically about what we were doing. I fear that some of the solutions we brought forward are not sustainable in the long run. I don't need to go into depth on that, but the idea that we capture all our wastewater, we treat it, and then we discharge it and waste it, heat, nutrients, and everything with it, in the long run, I think it's going to appear to be pretty stupid. So we need to be thinking systemically about these things, meaning climate resilience or climate change touches everything. It touches real estate values, it touches food availability, it touches quality of life in urban places. Just look at what's happened in North Carolina. We need to have a holistic understanding. What's some of the most exciting and perhaps distressing things that are happening now is insurance costs in Florida, which is going to ripple through the whole industry. I don't know if any of you had a chance to hear Senator Whitehouse speak about the systemic impacts of climate change. He's incredible on it, and I think that's one point. And then the other one is dynamicism. We need to breed an agility here, and I'm afraid the environmental management system, as we know it, a lot of us are in the room are part of it, is not about rapid, dynamic, agile work, especially with design with nature kinds of solutions. It tends to be bogged down and deliberative and very difficult. We can't afford that going forward, and it actually frustrates partners. Partners aren't interested to sit for two years to get a permit to do something everybody wants to do. Volunteers, citizens of all sorts, or residents of all sorts, excuse me. So we need to come up with a more dynamic way to move resilience forward than, oh, it's going to take 5 years to get that permit, and da-da-da-da. You all know what I mean if you work in the environmental management space. So I think these two ideas have to start to really come to the fore, and along with the things we know about. I can talk about those later.
I just want to second what Curt was mentioning regarding having systems-based solutions. This is really key and vital, I think, to how we approach our climate resilience initiatives and make sure that we're protecting what's important to us while promoting solutions that are sustainable in the long run and kind of have that long-term vision in response to some of the impacts that we're seeing. In addition, I just wanted to add a few remarks here, but as a state, we really need to also be focusing on what's most important, which is how our local communities are being impacted by the effects of climate change day to day. When these flooding disasters occur, individual homeowners are having to apply for millions in federal aid from FEMA to cover damages to their properties. We need to focus on delivering solutions that will be effective, will be sustainable, as Curt was mentioning, and not contribute to a false sense of security in the long run. This means investing in projects that will lead to long-term safety, rather than costly Band-Aid approaches, and supporting projects that have vulnerability analyses, hydrologic modeling to back them. And we need to deliver these solutions smoothly and effectively, right? Having a strong network of statewide partners, as we've kind of been discussing, is essential for delivering these solutions in an efficient way, essentially allowing all of us, state agencies, nonprofits, universities, community-based organizations, private sector entities, others, to utilize our strengths and support each other in coordinated assistance. And this ultimately is clear for our local communities to be able to access and navigate. With that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks. So with respect to the principles or values that will guide what will likely be tough decisions, I feel like this is something the Brown Foundation is confronted with every day, because we have to make decisions where to make investments. And so in this year, I think there are three things in particular that will guide the decisions that we make. First and foremost, equity and justice really have to be at the center of our work in all of our areas of our strategic action plan, so that when you think about the impact of climate and particularly the disproportionate impact of pollution in urban areas, where very often they have the least amount of resources to respond to climate. I think these communities face air quality challenges, less access to green space, urban heat effect, flooding, and so on. And so understanding that as we think about making investments in this space, centering equity and environmental justice in our work is the first principle. Second is, does this advance some collaboration or partnership, which we think is really key in all areas, but particularly in this area. And then third, what is the impact? We want to be sure that with limited resources, we're investing resources in a way that actually has an impact, that's measurable, and that we can demonstrate value, so that as we're thinking about kind of holding ourselves accountable, we're making investments that are really producing the kind of impact and change that we think is essential. So I would say those are the three values that will guide us as we think about where we invest limited resources at the moment.
This is great. I'm taking some rough notes. I wish we were recording this. I think we need a working session after this. Oh, we are. Yes, Greg is always recording. Actually, remember that. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think we have ourselves a working panel here in terms of the principles that should really guide our climate resilience efforts here. And I really like the themes that I'm hearing in setting these principles, and couldn't agree more, David, in terms of really setting equity and justice from the beginning, right? These are things that cannot be an afterthought. They have to come from before you're even thinking about the thing that you're going to be doing, right, in terms of what you're going to be addressing. And then Kim, in what you said in terms of the community, that Kate did a great job in her keynote, and I really appreciated in terms of the community, right? And really meeting the community where they're at and moving right together in that direction. And then Curt, I could not agree with you more in terms of the system thinking. I mean, when I think about all the graduate degree courses that I took, I think that one was the most impactful one. I mean, it really just changed the way of thinking. And I thought I would have been great if I would have just started there in terms of my academic and professional career, with system thinking approach. So thank you. And then for all those gems. So the second follow-up, the follow-up question I have for you all, we're a small state. I think that is part of our asset in terms of really being an example, right, for the rest of the region. However, it still presents a challenge, right, when we talk about the issues of climate resiliency. So how can we ensure that communities across Rhode Island understand the importance of adapting to climate change in a way that maintains the natural features and functions of our 400 miles of shoreline, as opposed to hardballing of the shore? So, right, there's an education and outreach component there in working across our communities. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Any thoughts on that question? David?
I would say first, a big part of this, I think, is sharing successful examples of this. And I think, local news coverage and organizations, giving recognition to projects. I was on a recent field trip with the Nature Conservancy to Crescent Park, where they have these two examples side by side of like the town or city responded to this challenge by building this concrete wall. I think, probably in good faith, they weren't bad people thinking like this was the answer. And then right next to it is this amazing project of this natural, set of plantings and stones and, much more sustainable, by the way, a fraction of the cost of the concrete wall. And it's just this, example of like literally side by side, bad and good. And, I think if you spoke to the people who made the decision to build that concrete wall, they would acknowledge years later that this was not the right approach. I think back then, people didn't know as much. So I think just making sure people know what is available and what is successful, that's, educating people. And then the second piece is obviously when there's legislation or regulations that are put forth, being certain that they reflect those choices so that we're funding the right activity and not giving federal or state resources to build the concrete wall, but instead to build a natural habitat that actually does the job in a much more sustainable way. So I would say those two things.
That's great. Kim or Curt?
I'll jump in here. Thank you. I'll kind of follow up on my answer to the first question here as well, but our local communities, as I was saying, they live the impacts of climate change, and it's really our responsibility as state employees, as leaders, to hear their experiences and let them determine the most critical needs. Given this, that sometimes in some circumstances, direct education is not always the most popular or the most effective to facilitating community-wide understanding of our resilient solutions. There's instances where it definitely is, but there's instances where sometimes there's pushback. But one thing I will say is that humanity copes best with hardship in general when we're able to do something about our difficulties and essentially contribute to a solution, right? And this is where we really have a strong opportunity to foster growth and understanding of successful and sustainable climate adaptation approaches. We really need to be bringing community members into the design decision-making process, right? Having them talk through resilient solutions at a particular site with environmental consultants, with engineers, and essentially hearing firsthand why a seawall might actually accelerate incoming storm surge towards vulnerable neighboring areas, and whereas instead a fully restored marsh might absorb the shock, right? We need to engage and not outreach, but engage community in honest conversations about relocation opportunities, potential for upland receiving zones, as Warren has begun to do in their market to Medicom work, and as we'll need to do in Johnston as well with some of the recent buyout funding that has come through. And we specifically need to be doing this by meeting people where they're at, right? Making ourselves open and available in existing community spaces, such as through our health equity zones. And we also need to be inviting community to join us in the implementation of solutions, right? We're thinking tree planting events, marsh restoration plantings, things along these lines. These are things that can elevate a family outing to a deeper understanding of how much our green spaces are really doing for us in terms of heat reduction, flood reduction, these sorts of things. So I would definitely really speak to and promote having the community directly involved in those decision-making processes, in those implementation processes, and really joining us in being a part of the solution.
I want to answer this question first with an observation. I had an opportunity to get in a plane and fly to Florida, and it was a clear day, and we flew right down the coast. We have done a hell of a lot of hardwalling between Boston and New York. Once you get south of New York and past New Jersey, it changes. And we need to appreciate what we've done, which is kind of a sad story of how these estuary areas in the Northeast, but that's part of our problem. The solution has been, we can fix this, we can fight nature, we can always fight nature and we can win. And that's a problem, that's a real problem. So if we want to advance nature-based thinking, back to my systems thinking part, we have to understand we're not going to win. That there's no win against nature. And we have to start to get more direct on that point. Maybe we missed it. My generation certainly missed it. Hopefully, I don't see a lot. Well, we divide a group in here. But because of a lot of environmental education, hopefully this concept takes hold. Second thing, now that I work, first of all, I have to do a tout for GZA because we designed what he saw in East Providence. But we have to be clear about the fact that nature solutions can be adapted to what happens in the future. Hard walls, not so much. And we really, as much as we can model and think about, and maybe it'll be a foot, maybe it'll be 3 feet, maybe it'll be 20-inch storms, maybe 5-inch storms, we have to recognize that we don't know this future, but it's going to be a hell of a ride, a really tough ride. So the adaptability of nature-based thinking has to be brought forward. And we really have to reset people around the problem. It's not what we did in the past. Oh, I'll just build a wall and hold the water back, and I'll have my beautiful front yard, and I'll plant my trees, and I'll have my dock, and I'll be great. No, it's not going to be great. Those things won't sustain the kind of impact going forward. The final point with this is, and I could say this as a regulator, the regulators have to get the stick out of their butt on this stuff and realize that we're talking about something that isn't permanent, that can be adapted. You need to have a different kind of path forward for solutions that are adaptable. Greg's nodding his head over there because I don't want to tell his salamander story and mush his work, but the bottom line is we're still thinking about nature-based solutions the way we think about hard walls in terms of regulation. That has to change. We have a tremendous practitioner group in the state of Rhode Island. The consulting groups here are awesome, and they can do this stuff, and they can do everything Kim just talked about in terms of engagement. We have some difficulties, like dam removals, pretty tough, as you know. How do you get people over that hump? But I think there are enormous ways, but we've got to reset this conversation somehow. I don't know exactly how to do it, but it's going to take a voice that's clear, not mushy, around what we're facing and why we have to have something that's adaptable going forward, that doesn't, in human arrogance kind of way, say we can really win this. There's no winning climate adaptation. There's dealing with the circumstances as they come. Finally, just a bit of good news for what Kim's talking about. The Environment Business Council of New England is working on an event with the municipal, Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, to start to have this conversation. We have to have this conversation. It's going on more strongly in some of the other states. We really need to get it going, and get it going in a very strong way. And again, that requires some leadership. We're hearing leadership here, but we really got to reset this thing.
That message again about the need for agility, right, and regulators in the room, resetting and adapting, and now applies to me also in government a year and a half in, right, those messages. Yeah, know the story there. And Kim, I really like what you're saying, and I like the direction that the Municipal Resiliency Program is going in, looking at what's working in Boston in terms of really doing meaningful engagement with the community and making them a part of the process, including in the decision-making process when it comes to green infrastructure resiliency projects and the importance of that. And sometimes there is the perception that if you do that, you're going to slow things down, but you gain so much, right, by creating that alignment and meeting the community where they're at, right, and bringing the science and the lived experience together. And David, in terms of what I'm hearing that you've captured in your response is something that I hear some of my mentors and people that I admire, including you, it's an all hands on deck, right? This is a crisis. It's in all of the above, right? We need all sectors to come together. That involves the media, it and that involves all of you in showcasing the examples out there to get the message, the education across, and of course, legislation, regulation. We need all these things to keep moving in the right direction. So in the time we have left, I want us to touch more on some of the needs and opportunities ahead of us that you think will require more collaboration on climate resilience planning and action across different sectors. So why don't we start there, and more into the need for collaboration and what are some of the opportunities and also some examples in the things that you know are coming and are happening.
I have one that I want to share. I'm dying to share. If you think about the habitat loss we're going to experience, we have to get over the idea that we can't do things in the riparian, in the water, literally. Short story, we did some work at the Save the Bay Center. We put a sill out and marsh grew behind it. That's old tech. It's very doable. Not done very much in Rhode Island, done much more elsewhere. There are ideas moving around, things like something that's being experimented up in East Boston called the Emerald Tui approach. They build balls of what is essentially marsh, and they tie it all together and they anchor them and they put them in front of things, in front of shorelines to slow down erosion and actually create more habitat. Because our salt marshes are going to flood, folks. We're going to lose enormous amounts of fisheries habitat. And fisheries are so important to our economy. That's what I mean. Think about things systemically. Wow, we don't want that economic impact. Let's talk about that necessarily about, the Emerald Tui, but talk about how we're going to have to do things in water to slow erosion and show flexibility about what to do. And I think that requires collaboration insofar as we need to sit down and really start to look at the paradigm and rethink the paradigm and say, we're going to have to do some things that heretofore we thought were a bad idea, like putting structures in water to somehow, somehow compromise, shading. I can go into all the ecological discussions that will go on, and we don't need to do that here. But the bottom line is, we're going to lose this nearshore habitat. We're going to have to do some really exciting things to maintain it, at least for decades ahead. Maybe things will stabilize by 2050, 2060, but for years ahead. And we need to think about these new solutions, and that's going to require a lot of conversation across municipalities, the state, environmental business council people, and others. And I'm really excited about it because it gives me hope.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Curt. I'll jump in with a couple things here, and I'll just start off broadly by saying that climate resilience is inherently cross-sector. Our solutions are going to need to be contextual, multifaceted, depending on factors such as lifespan of existing infrastructure, risk of permanent versus temporary inundation, et cetera. And our statewide resilience needs are similarly multifaceted, right? I was mentioning this a little bit in kind of the opening remarks, but there's a variety of things we need, from strong coordination on delivery of our statewide initiatives. We talked a little bit about hydrologic modeling and design support, increased funding for adaptation, implementation, and maintenance, also voluntary buyout solutions, and increased transparency and community access to our climate resilience initiatives, resources, information. And as I kind of said earlier in this conversation, these needs and solutions they're really going to require all of our skill sets to accomplish, as Curt was alluding to. We're going to need to bring together our state agencies, our non-governmental organizations, our university partners, private sector partners. And this is where groups such as the Resilience EC4 subgroup, the Rhode Island Resilience Partner Group that I was speaking to a little bit earlier, can play instrumental roles, allowing for sharing initiatives, brainstorming on interorganizational initiatives, providing direct input into state resilience standards and metrics, contributing directly to the 2024 Resilience Report, 2025 plan, as well as our climatechange.ri.gov web resources that we've been working to pull together. And really, I think the goal across all of this is three key things. We need to be pulling together on providing the needed support to our local communities. through local resilience planning, local resilience funding for projects. We need to be streamlining our support so that we can deliver that assistance in a way that's easy to navigate, easy for communities to access. And three, we need to be kind of continually facilitating that connection between the local communities and the statewide resources through initiatives such as, like I was mentioning, the regional resilience coordinators, who can kind of work to provide that connection and provide that assistance. And Priscilla, I know you were asking a little bit about upcoming initiatives and kind of things that we currently have going on. I went over this a little bit in the opening remarks here, but just to provide a kind of a briefer update, or I guess a broader update. The Resilience EC4 subgroup that I mentioned, that's our state agency kind of convening around resilience that has appointed designees from all agencies of the EC4, has met 3 times since its kickoff in July. And at these meetings, we've worked to map our state resilience programs and initiatives. Our second meeting was really focused on those statewide resilience standards, what we want to be focusing on for metrics for success. And our third meeting was primarily focused on gathering updates on our 61 state resilience actions that were outlined in the 2018 Resilient Rhody Climate Action Strategy. On the Rhode Island Resilience Partner Group side, this group kicked off in September with members, again, as I mentioned, from nonprofit organizations, universities, private sector subject matter experts, providing government, essentially those that are providing statewide resilience assistance to our local municipalities and communities. And in our first meeting, we worked to map our statewide non-governmental resilience programs and initiatives, a process that we're going to be continuing through late October collaboratively. I did want to mention that this group is open to all statewide climate resilience assistance providers. So if you would like to join the Rhode Island Resilience Partner Group, please reach out to me by phone or email. We will get you connected with us. This is something that we want to be open and inclusive. So we would definitely like to get you involved. And our team at DEM is now working to compile the information that we've gathered from these 2 groups, as well as information gathered from our cities and towns in May of this year into the 2024 State of Resilience Report. And this report will essentially be serving as a snapshot, right? An overview of our current state efforts and initiatives on resilience. And ultimately will serve as a launching point for the development of statewide goals and strategies in the 2025 Resilience Plan. I've gone on and on, so I will leave it there. But
I just quickly want to say, in terms of needs and opportunities, I think the worsening effects of climate change really necessitate collaboration on climate resilience planning, and I really want to compliment Kim's work on the partner groups, because I think that's a really important and very creative way to be sure that we're engaging the community in all this work. I would just say, in terms of opportunities, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, obviously historic opportunities that absolutely require collaboration and partnership. So making sure we maximize all of those opportunities. And then there are a number of state actions, the Act on Climate, the Act on Coasts, some number of study commissions, I think, are another opportunity to really build upon this collaborative model to be sure that Rhode Island is positioning itself to take full advantage of all the resources that are available to do this work.
Well, and I think you have all, and I expected you to because you're also stellar, have touched upon some of the couple other questions I had for you. You brought up the need to really support communities, municipalities, to streamline across the board. And David, I really appreciate that you brought the historic federal funding opportunities and getting those messages out there. And most recently, right, with the Rhode Island Foundation, the Office of Integrated Resources, Climate Jobs Rhode Island, working with the private sector, Partnership for Rhode Island and Compete RI, hosting a summit on the Inflation Reduction Act and that direct pay and elective pay opportunity. There's going to be more of that, right? And that applies to mitigation, resiliency strategies, as you mentioned, different study opportunities, the Act on Climate strategies, and I really like, Curt, that you've already mentioned the involvement of the League of Cities and Towns, and I believe you mentioned the Environment Business Council as well, right, getting involved, and then of course, Kim, all the work that you're doing And that was going to be part of some of the follow-up questions. So what I'm going to do now is just say I would like to see if there are, in the last few minutes that we have, as we try to get back on schedule, a couple short questions from the audience. But before we do that, is there anything that you didn't get a chance to share in terms of how we're going to ensure collaboration on these things? Or are you ready to go to a couple audience questions? Yep, go for it.
Very quick. There's a study commission led by Representative Korioth that's commencing. They've had one organizing meeting. It's a House study commission. Look for that. It's a good chance to have this kind of conversation and get in front of them what our needs are going forward, so the legislature can be more well informed than perhaps they otherwise would be. And it's a wide-ranging group, so look for that. I don't know. Again, I think the state publicizes when those meetings will be once they're scheduled.
I was going to add the next meeting of that commission is November 8th for folks who are interested.
Yeah, and I'll add quickly before we go to the audience, one of the things that has came up in the EC4 Advisory Board shared by Sheila Doherty, my boss at the city, and I'm a member of that, is as the state is developing its climate strategy, just figuring out how do we all work together to get all this information out. So keep that in mind. And I know, of course, there's the different newsletters and the information that all your respective organizations gets out there, but there is a need, right, to coordinate and to just have a central place, or not central place, but it's sort of like this public awareness campaign.
Something we're thinking a lot about at the Rhode Island Foundation, because I think we can really play a role in that space. More to come.
Thank you, David. All right. Is there a burning question or two out there? I see a hand.
Hi.
Another hand.
David, the fast solution isn't comprehensive enough. The comprehensive solution takes too much time. So what would you like to see either from federal, state, municipal level that we could do to, get the right solutions a little bit quicker to communities that are hardest impacted?
Did you hear that question well? Okay. Not fully? Okay, so I think what I heard you say is we're talking about these comprehensive solutions, but then there's the urgency, right? So how do we repeat the latter part for me?
So kind of how to get the Venn diagram of fast or quicker and comprehensive solutions to communities. And then is there changes that could happen at the municipal, state, or federal level to make sure that resources can get there to help?
How do you ensure resources are getting out the door, right? And that alignment between federal, state, municipal, and how do you balance, right, the comprehensive and the fast action?
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think this is the question on everyone's minds, right? Is how do we balance the immediate needs with thinking long term, making sure that we're delivering those sustainable solutions, right? I would say a couple of things here, and it does echo some of my comments from previously, but to elaborate further, one, of course, we need context-specific solutions on the ground, right? At any given site, there's going to be infrastructure present that has different lifespans that it will exist out to. You're going to have different situations in terms of the residential structures on the site. Is this an open space? And you're going to have. You're essentially going to be looking across so many different situations and scenarios that at the state level, we can't necessarily be saying that this is the one solution or this is the one adaptation approach that we want to be implementing, right? So I think it's really, in that respect, it's our responsibility at the state level to stay nimble, stay flexible, essentially, so that when those situations come up and we're kind of addressing these different sites and these need areas, that we can continue to respond in a way that's going to be most effective and deliver resources that will be most effective, right, that are needed locally. So that's kind of one broadly that I'll mention, but I also want to speak to your come out of coordination across like the federal, state, and local level. And again, I think this is where, of course, partnerships, as we've been speaking about, comes into play, but really making sure that we're organized, we're informed on each other's initiatives is so essential, right? Because I think a lot of what can kind of slow us down is when we start to kind of get duplicative or create inefficient processes, and not out of there's no necessarily desire from anyone's perspective to do that, but it's just there's so much great work going on across our state, across our region. But the more that we can stay informed, the more that we can stay coordinated across all of our different sectors and across our different organizations, our agencies, it really allows us to start to work together on initiatives and then package those initiatives in a way that are really easily digestible and accessible to our local municipalities, our local communities, and can allow us to move much more quickly. So I'll pause there for a minute.
I have just one quick point, and a lot of firms in this attending today know how to do this. You got to have a good plan, and there's some really good planning examples where you can run models and get your priorities in order to make sure you're doing the smart things, and not the thing somebody who's a friend of the mayor, who's a friend of the council chair, you know how things work, right? Let's not be stupid about it. There needs to be an engagement and really good planning at the community level that's a step beyond the MRP right now, that really looks at some modeling and some work. The federal government has this amazing toolbox under NOAA, but it's out there. It takes a little money, and our state needs to invest more in planning maybe to help with that. That's been an example in Massachusetts and Connecticut. We can talk more about it, but once that's in place, I think you'll be thinking I'm doing the right things for the right reasons going forward.